Welcome to today's deep dive. We're spending our time today unpacking a really fascinating analytical text focused on the ancient biblical book of Hosea,
Yeah.
specifically chapter 7.
Right. And our mission here isn't just a simple theology lesson,
Definitely not.
We're using this text to explore this incredibly universal human experience, which is uh, our reaction to sudden suffering and also the surprisingly hidden trap of our own pride in those moments.
Yeah, to really frame what this text is analyzing, we need to think about that immediate, almost involuntary reflex every single one of us has when we just get blindsided by something awful.
Oh, for sure.
The source actually brings up a cultural touchstone that perfectly encapsulates this.
Yeah.
Nancy Kerrigan at the 1994 U.S. Figure Skating Championships.
Wow. Yeah. That moment is seared into cultural memory for a reason. I mean, you have an elite athlete, right,
Yeah.
at the absolute peak of her career, struck down in a corridor in this completely senseless, shocking attack.
Yeah.
And the audio caught on camera, her wailing in sheer agony and confusion, it just captures that universal human cry.
Right. She's sitting there clutching her knee, crying out, "Why me? Why?"
Yeah.
And that specific question is something that you, listening right now, have undoubtedly wrestled with in your own dark moments. Like when pain or confusion or blatant injustice strikes, our immediate impulse is just a demanded explanation.
We want the ledger to balance.
Exactly. We question the goodness or the fairness of the universe.
And unbelievers and people of deep faith alike, they experience this exact same tension. We are desperate for the universe to be a rational place. But the text we're analyzing today throws a massive curveball into that line of thinking.
It really does.
It actively pivots away from trying to answer the why of suffering.
Right. The prophet Hosea isn't interested in providing a neat philosophical answer for why bad things happen. Instead, the text forces us to look at a much more uncomfortable reality, which is how do we respond when the suffering actually hits?
The focus shifts entirely to the human reaction.
Yeah. And the core quote the source pulls from Hosea 7.neo is, frankly, it's kind of jarring to read. It says, but in all of their troubles, their pride keeps them from returning to me.
That single sentence just completely disrupts almost everything we naturally assume about human resilience.
Right.
What's fascinating here is that our default cultural narrative suggests hitting rock bottom is the ultimate humbling experience.
Yeah, the cliche is that when you're flat on your back, the only place to look is up.
Exactly. The assumption is severe difficulty naturally strips away our illusions of self-sufficiency. You run out of options, your resources are depleted, so you finally surrender and ask for divine help.
But I have to push back on the logic of that, though. I mean, if you're drowning in the ocean, human nature dictates that you scream for a lifeguard.
Sure.
You flail your arms, you look for anything that floats. Why on earth would someone actively refuse a life preserver when they're clearly going under? It defies our most basic survival instincts.
Well, it entirely defies our physical survival instincts, yes. But it makes perfect psychological sense when you examine what kind of environment that drowning person was living in before they fell into the water.
Okay, right.
To understand why someone would swat away a life preserver, we have to look at the specific historical setting the source material focuses on. The text transports us back to ancient Israel during the reign of King Jeroboam II.
And we tend to picture ancient biblical kingdoms as these constantly struggling agrarian societies just barely surviving in the desert.
Oh, yeah. But the text notes that the era of Jeroboam II was the exact opposite of that. It was essentially a golden age.
Wow.
Economically, the Northern Kingdom was flourishing at unprecedented levels. Trade routes were expanding. Wealth was pouring in.
So they were doing really well.
Incredibly well. Militarily, they had massive stability. They were a regional superpower at the time.
So you have a booming economy, secure borders. The culture experiences this massive shift from just surviving to intensely thriving.
Yeah.
How does that wealth fundamentally alter their collective psychology?
Well, prosperity alters psychology by breeding a supreme sense of self-reliance. As the wealth accumulated, people began crediting their stability to their own human wisdom.
Right, their clever political alliances and stuff.
Exactly, their material strength. They officially still bore the title of God's people, but their daily reliance shifted entirely to what they could control. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where the text digs into the mechanism of ancient idolatry, which is super crucial to understand.
Because when we hear the word idols, we just picture people bowing down to random gold statues,
Right.
which seems incredibly primitive and foolish to a modern mind.
It seems primitive until you understand what those statues actually represented. The surrounding nations worshiped deities like Maul. And these were not just passive statues, they were the focal points of a highly transactional religion.
Transactional.
Yeah. The ancient mindset was essentially a business contract. I offer a sacrifice to the god of rain, and in exchange...
The god provides rain for my crops.
Exactly. It's a trade.
It's a cosmic vending machine.
Precisely. And transactional religion feels incredibly controllable and immediate. You can see the altar, you perform the ritual, you expect the result.
Right.
Contrast that with the God of Israel, unseen, deeply holy, and entirely sovereign.
A covenant relationship with an unseen God requires absolute trust and submission, not a business transaction.
Right. And to a wealthy, pragmatic society flush with cash, trusting an unseen God feels inefficient. Why rely on a mysterious deity when you can depend on visible, controllable transactions?
So what does this all mean? Synthesizing that, it's sort of like tossing out a true north compass because you just downloaded a shiny new smartphone app that promises to guide you.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. The app gives you instant dopamine. It feels controllable. You can swipe around to see immediate data. It caters to your desire to manage your own life.
Yep.
But the compass requires you to trust a magnetic field you can't even see or manipulate.
Exactly. And their prolonged period of prosperity completely deceived them into thinking the app would never lose its signal. They lived under the illusion that the god of the compass was merely an optional accessory to their success.
Rather than the absolute necessity for their survival.
Right.
And the source text makes a fascinating distinction here. It points out that the pride infecting ancient Israel wasn't necessarily showing up as chest-thumping arrogance.
No, not at all.
They weren't necessarily walking around mocking the heavens.
The pride was much more insidious. It was a deep-seated, quiet rejection of God's supremacy. They simply organized their society, their economy, and their lives in a way that rendered him unnecessary.
But then the inevitable happens. The boon times under Jeroboam II end.
They always do.
The geopolitical landscape shifts. The source material outlines the onset of severe political instability, the rise of foreign threats like the Assyrian Empire, and deep internal moral decay.
The water starts rising fast.
Yeah.
And this is the moment the trap of their earlier prosperity snaps completely shut. Because they had been so thoroughly conditioned to rely on tangible human solutions during those decades of wealth, their instinct when the crisis hit was not to repent.
Their muscle memory was tied to their own competence, so they just tried harder.
Right.
Yeah.
They doubled down on the very strategies that had estranged them from God in the first place. They frantically sought new political alliances with Egypt and Assyria.
Just scrambling.
Yeah, they attempted to maneuver their way out of the crisis using the exact same worldly wisdom that had built their fragile empire. They were suffering immensely, their nation was fracturing, yet they stubbornly refused to return to the Lord.
Which brings up a major tension in the text, and I really want to press on this. The source explicitly states that wisdom, planning, and taking practical action are not inherently wrong.
Correct.
Like making a budget to get out of debt or undergoing medical treatments when you're sick.
No.
Those aren't sins.
No, of course not.
So if you, the listener, are navigating a severe crisis right now, how do you actually measure the difference between being a responsible, proactive person and secretly being driven by this destructive, stubborn pride?
That is the absolute crux of the issue the text is trying to illuminate. It really hinges on redefining how we understand pride.
Okay.
As a culture, we define pride as something loud and obnoxious. We think of narcissism, boasting, demanding to be the center of attention.
Yeah, the typical arrogant guy.
Right. But the text argues that the most dangerous form of pride is subtle. It's a whisper. It actively disguises itself as competence.
Competence. Wait, really? We literally build our entire educational and economic systems around rewarding competence. You're saying that extreme capability can act as a mask for spiritual pride.
Well, capability itself is a gift, but the reliance on that capability is the trap. Pride, at its most fundamental root, is simply the refusal to surrender control. It's the insistence that we are ultimately sufficient on our own. It wears the mask of independence and heavy responsibility, convincing us that if we just strategize well enough, we can secure our own existence.
So how does an individual test themselves to see if they've crossed that line? From healthy responsibility to prideful self-reliance.
You measure it by examining the source of your internal peace. The mechanism is quite revealing, actually. If your internal stability and peace of mind are entirely contingent on your plan working out perfectly.
If the spreadsheet has to balance perfectly.
Right. If your calmness depends on the spreadsheet balancing, the doctor giving the exact right diagnosis, or the political alliance holding, you are operating in pride. You're resting your entire existence on your own ability to manage the universe.
Because the moment the plan cracks, your peace completely shatters.
Conversely, healthy responsibility means you still make the spreadsheet, you still go to the doctor, but your ultimate peace is anchored in a sovereign God.
You recognize your profound dependency.
Exactly. You acknowledge that your plans are fragile and that your ultimate security lies outside of your own competence. The moment practical actions replace your reliance on God, the moment your internal monologue shifts to, I can handle this on my own, you've closed the door to grace.
That reframes the historical account dramatically. I mean, it transforms ancient Israel from a distant cautionary tale into a very confronting psychological mirror for modern life.
Oh, absolutely.
The source emphasizes that human nature has not evolved a single inch since the 8th century BC.
We are identical to them in our behavioral loops. We are incredibly prone to drift into self-reliance during our own seasons of ease. When life is running smoothly, when the bank account has a comfortable cushion, our health is robust, and our professional abilities feel adequate for the tasks in front of us, we quietly build our own transactional idols.
We elevate our careers, our optimized morning routines, our investment portfolios.
Right.
They become our modern Baals.
Mm.
We put in the effort, we extract the security, and God slowly fades from a daily necessity into a cultural accessory.
Someone we might acknowledge during a holiday, but not the entity we depend on for our next breath.
And then the tragedy repeats itself. When the modern crisis inevitably arrives, when the company downsizes, or a sudden illness strikes, or a vital relationship shatters, our first reflex is rarely to fall to our knees in humility.
No, instead, we furiously search for better strategies.
We buy another self-help book, we switch therapists, we work 80 hours a week instead of 40.
We scramble to find another app to fix the problem because we're terrified of admitting we threw away the compass.
Yeah. We desperately want to manage the fallout ourselves so we can retain the illusion of control.
This raises an important question regarding this exact reflex. When the trouble comes, do we return or do we retreat further into our own echo chambers? Do we genuinely seek his presence, or are we merely seeking a quick solution to our discomfort? Are we trusting in a sovereign wisdom, or leaning entirely on our own highly flawed understanding?
It's a profound gut check because it exposes our deepest motivations. Do we want God, or do we just want our comfortable lives restored?
The historical reality outlined in the text paints a heartbreaking picture of where that self-reliance leads. The ultimate tragedy of ancient Israel wasn't simply that they committed geopolitical errors or even that they sinned.
Right.
The defining tragedy was that the door of divine mercy remained wide open the entire time. God was present, actively willing to guide them, ready to restore them, and they looked at the open door and refused to walk through it.
They chose to drown rather than take the life preserver, purely because taking the life preserver would require admitting they couldn't swim.
Yeah, they hesitated and resisted because admitting their need felt too vulnerable. They endured immense suffering, but their fierce dedication to their own competence kept them entirely isolated from the one thing that could actually save them.
So the source text leaves the reader with a powerful, dual-sided application based on this history. The first is a warning for times of prosperity, right? Guard your heart with brutal honesty when things are going well. Do not let the intoxicating feeling of success trick you into forgetting your inherent dependency.
And the second application completely flips the script on how we are conditioned to view our pain.
It argues that suffering should not be viewed as a solitary crisis that you're responsible for managing in the dark. Instead, it frames every trouble, every moment of overwhelming confusion as a designated pathway to return.
Right.
When you feel that immense, crushing pressure to isolate yourself and fix everything through sheer willpower, the text identifies that specific feeling as the signal to stop and surrender.
The conclusion drawn from Hosea is that in the act of returning, in relinquishing the desperate need to control the outcome, you find something vastly superior to a mere solution to your problem.
Yeah.
You find the presence of God himself, which is what the human heart was actually seeking through all of those frantic transactional strategies.
We start this deep dive with Nancy Kerrigan's agonizing cry of "Why me?", which is just a perfect representation of how we all feel when the world suddenly becomes cruel and unpredictable. But by following the analytical journey through the historical warnings of Jeroboam II's Israel, we've landed on a much deeper, more actionable truth.
Absolutely.
The greatest danger in our seasons of suffering might not actually be the pain we are enduring, but the hidden trap of our own pride. A pride that is highly camouflaged as our own competence and capability.
We live in a society that idolizes the self-made individual. We celebrate grit, relentless hustle, and absolute autonomy.
We really do.
But this text reveals that those heavily celebrated virtues can easily become the exact mechanisms that keep us spiritually starving, exhausted, and isolated from grace.
Which leaves you with a deeply provocative thought to mull over long after this audio finishes. If our most prized modern traits, our fierce independence, our self-sufficiency, and our relentless drive to manage our own lives, can secretly be the masks that pride wears to keep us isolated from true mercy, how would your life practically change tomorrow if you viewed your next major obstacle not as a puzzle you must frantically solve, but as an open invitation to finally surrender?